We're going to explore the most powerful guesstimating technique which we've used for many, many decades on any type of project, whether it's waterfall or agile. But before we do that, let's look at the flaws in estimating. Where are estimating errors made? And the first estimating error, if you think of these as meta estimating errors, is in scope. If you don't have the scope right, if you don't have your O3 right, then you can misestimate the size of the project, which is a serious estimating problem. Even if you get the scope right, as we've discussed throughout this whole Agile PM plugin series, if you don't understand what quality is, then you can make a major estimating error. You've got the scope right, but you misestimated quality. There's an attribute that people wanted, like, for example, efficiency, that they didn't tell you about or you didn't explore, and you've now doubled the cost of the project. And I talked about that in one of the previous videos about quality. You can also misestimate the risk, get that wrong. And this is literally catastrophic. If I think something's low risk, I will think it's going to take this long. If you think the same thing is high risk, it's going to take that long. Risk, as we'll explore later, completely influences estimating. And if you haven't done a systemic risk assessment, like we talked about in one of the earlier tutorials, you're going to make a problem. You've got the scope right, you've got your head around the quality, but you still actually misestimate the risk. But the biggest one, without any question, is you misestimate people's capability, or they misestimate their own capability. Studies by Beam, Putman and Myers, tons of other researchers, Capers-Jones, suggest that the variance between really good performers and average performers can be 2, 3, 5 to 1. The difference between really great performers and really average performers could be an order of magnitude. So if you've actually either, as I said earlier, don't know who's going to do the project with you, or worse, they or you misestimate their capability, you have a massive source of estimating error. So let me summarize. Misestimating scope, misestimating quality, misestimating risk, and misestimating people's capability are major causes of estimating error. This also, as I said earlier, comes to size, because the bigger the project, the larger the scope, the harder it is for people to control it. So you've got this exposure to the scope changing without you even knowing. Let's explore this concept of guesstimating. Years ago, I was introduced to a technique called Wide-Band Delphi. Now, Wide-Band Delphi came from the Hudson Institute, headed by Herman Kahn. And it was a method to predict the future, which of course is estimating or guesstimating. But the sneaky and tricky thing about it, which you think about it a sec, is really smart, is you don't just ask the experts, you ask a broad range of people what they think the future is going to be. And what you'll get is multiple views from, the average citizen to a scientist to a politician to an engineer. And all these numbers come in and they'll be really scattered. But then what you do is you put back that result to everyone again. In other words, you repeat the loop, and people see the input from all these different experts. And what you notice is people start adjusting their original estimate based on the broader wideband view. Think of it as the wisdom of crowds, if you will. Now, many of you, of course, will see this as planning poker. And planning poker is simply a variation on Wide-Band Delphi. But we've used Wide-Band Delphi in waterfall projects and also hybrid projects, because a question I have around planning poker, which most of you will know, is it's still only used to estimate user stories. But in any project, there's going to be documentation, change management, interface development, etc., which are not subject or not easily aligned to the concept of planning poker, which is where this concept of Wide-Band Delphi works really well. That leads to another principle. An estimate made by a group who knows what they're doing is always more accurate than an estimate made by one person. Wide-Band Delphi and planning poker are simply a structured group assessment. And the comment I want to make that, and we've seen this work many times, is don't just involve the team. There are many stakeholders who have a critical role to play in the project, who also have to spend time in it, and in many cases do part of the project, such as change management or documentation, etc. So if you're going to do either planning poker or Wide-Band Delphi, which we strongly recommend, involve the critical stakeholders, involve the key people. I've seen these Wide-Band Delphi sessions have 30, 40 people in them. And despite the fact it sounds overwhelming, it is incredibly useful. And if you've got 30, 40 people in a room, including business stakeholders, right, and by the way, including folks who have to live with it as well, then you're going to find your estimation is a lot more accurate. Simply, the more people involved in estimating, the better. Let's explore an example of Wide-Band Delphi and planning poker. You've got your O3 model, you've broken it out into outputs and outcome. You pick up an output and you simply find who are the stakeholders you need to deliver that output. Invite them to a room, then share the detail of the output, whether it's got sub-outputs, which of course could break into user stories. But more importantly, you revisit the quality agreement, we've talked about that in this series, and you redo the actual risk model, the project risk model, for example. You've got to get that risk into play. What are the high risk factors before you ask people to estimate? Then each person estimates, and I'll come back to that in a sec, and then you put the results up and you look for any major variation, look for strategic outliers. You know, I might think it's 10 and you might think it's 6. Then we have a conversation around why I think it's 10 and why you think it's 6, and then we get to estimate again. That's the fundamental process of Wide-Band Delphi, and you can use the same approach in planning poker. Let's move to the most controversial part of this tutorial, which is the concept of single point estimating versus 3-point estimating, or what some people call sensitivity analysis. If, for example, let's imagine we're in Sydney or Melbourne or a city, and you've got some experience in going out to the airport, and I asked you the question, how long do you think it would take me today to get to the airport? Everyone will give me an answer. But what they've done in their head is they've looked outside, they've looked around, they've used all their experience and said, wait a sec, it's raining, it's a Friday, the football grand final's on, you know, Robert, it'll take you an hour. But if I'd asked you that on Tuesday, you probably would have given me 30 minutes. So by asking people the question, how long do you think it's going to take, you force them into a single point estimate. No profession apart from business and IT, and certainly around projects, thinks it can do that single point estimating. Economists don't do it, statisticians don't do it, any profession involved in estimating always uses sensitivity analysis, which fundamentally says, best case, how long do you think it would take me to get to the airport? Likely or probable, what do you think it's going to take me to get to the airport? And that's a different number. Worst case, traffic jams, blah, 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 what do you think? And you end up with not one figure, but 3 figures. Then you can apply a formal risk assessment and choose which of those 3 numbers you're going to use. That's the basis of it. It actually takes less time to get 3 figures out of someone than it does typically to get 1 figure.